First of all, Matlock's 3 rules of sustainability. The first rule of sustainability is stop doing stupid. And stupid's kind of defined generally based on context, but stop doing stupid. The second rule is don't start doing stupid. And so really my work is about don't start doing stupid, implementing policies, programs, trying to change the way we do things with consequences or unintended consequences. And I had a third rule, but it was challenged today, which is stop eating endangered species. But I learned this morning that in fact, maybe we can't have a panda burger. Sorry, Melissa, if with our tissue culture technologies coming up, and maybe endangered species food isn't so out of range anymore. So I'm going to set that third rule aside and reconsider that for a while. I don't know about you, but I have no intention. All right. Life cycle assessment. You've seen a lot about it. I'm not going to give you a 20-minute lecture on life cycle assessment because it's, first of all, tedious and boring, and second of all, not that hard. It's not that complicated either. It is what I just said before, tedious. It's a standardized method for compilation and evaluation of the inputs, outputs, potential environmental impacts of product systems throughout its life cycle. Peter talked about that earlier. I think he gave exactly this definition. Life cycle is defined as consecutive and interlinked stages of a product system. From material acquisition, that's from the earth, that's digging up the iron ore up in the Iron Range, all the way to forging the parts for the tractor to plowing the field, generation from natural resources to final disposal. We've all seen these sorts of graphics of life cycle assessment, and we've had a discussion, significant discussion about the impact of food waste. And I've told folks it just doesn't matter how efficient our producers are. If we spend all of our time increasing the effectiveness and efficiency and reducing the impacts of our food production, if we take 40% of everything at the end post-consumer and throw it away, it just doesn't matter. We're never going to get that good on the front end to offset that back end loss. So it is, hands down, the fundamental challenge of our time. Now, one of my mentors, Norman Borlaug, told me when I was finishing my bachelor's degree in agronomy at Oklahoma State, he said, Marty, hunger, because I wanted to feed the world, you know, Ethiopia was coming out of a huge mass media famine, and that was inspiring me. He said, Marty, hunger today is no longer an agronomic problem, it's an economic problem. Hunger is an economic problem. And so as we look at, if you read the bottom billion, and Peter, I don't remember his last name, who wrote the bottom billion, slipped my mind right now. He was former World Food Bank director. Says the reason that people are starving today isn't because there's not enough food, it's because they make less than $2 a day. That's that simple. Why do we waste food? Because it's cheap. How many of you throw away 40% of the wine that you buy? Don't show of hands. How many of you throw away 40% of the wine you buy? What do you generally do with that last little bit of bottle at the end of the social evening that you have? Come on, glug, 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 glug. Yeah, you don't throw it away, you chug it, right? It has value. It has value because you paid $30 for that bottle, or if you're like me, $12 for that bottle, and you're not going to throw it away. Well, we have a number of reasons in the developed economies for why we waste food, and a lot of them are just perception, and a lot of them are the way we process and package, and all the categories of it. The amount of shrinkage we have in fresh fruits and vegetables are just absolutely outrageous. Shrinkage is what we call post-harvest losses to the consumer, but it's really even post-consumer losses that are outrageous. I'm not talking to you about that. That's a reason we need another conference just on that. But that's part of the stupid we have to stop doing. Where did life cycle assessment came from? It really came out of the 80s in hazardous waste with RCRA regulations and hazardous waste, where we had cradle to grave responsibilities for certain listed hazardous waste in industry. Cradle to grave responsibility, because people were taking barrels of waste and selling them to a backwoods disposer who would throw them out in the bayou. And then you'd find these barrels of hazardous waste in the bayou. Who's responsible for it? Well, it actually was Dow Chemical down the road who did that. And so that sort of regulatory framing meant we had to start tracking these things, inventorying them. And so inventorying cradle to grave hazardous waste is really where this came from. When you understand that, you start to understand how LCA works. It's about tracking all the chemicals in a process from the very beginning all the way to the end. Ultimately, what we'd like to do is make this thing circular, so there is no grave. It's cradle to cradle, but there's an economic problem with that. I told Dr. Borlaug, I'll go as far as I can go to end hunger on this planet, but I will not become an economist. So people make decisions, LCAs do not. Almost all decisions humans make have unintended consequences. That's the starting stupid. Normative decisions, ethical framings, and risk value judgments are made by people in context of laws, community norms, and social values. These are the things we care about. Eleanor Ostrom said, we don't make decisions based upon rational choice. We really make decisions based upon our sense of values, shared values, and a sense of common good. She was one of the grand heroes of social psychology from University of Indiana at Bloomington. So these are the most important decisions humans make. The outcomes of an LCA cannot make these decisions for you. They provide information, quantitative risk-based assessments of outcomes. But LCAs, like computers, are stupid. And I almost said administrators, but I didn't. They answer the questions you ask them. They answer the questions you ask them. We had in a previous panel, great questions. And Luis, I think you asked the question, well, what about social issues, right? Well, the grand challenges of our generation, the 16 Sustainable Development Goals with the 17th goal of forming partnerships to address those 16 goals, are all social challenges. Because I guess there's a fourth rule of sustainability, which is it's all about us. It's not about other life. Other life only matters because of us and our own value system. So it's all about us. So don't try to make decisions justifying them by other value systems. It's all about us. Recognize it's all about us and figure out how to leverage the about us in the decision making. These are our grand challenges. Our big difficulty with those grand challenges, you can't do everything all at once, in spite of the movie. So what it means is we have to make choices about what we're going to do today and what costs we're going to pay today to achieve a benefit tomorrow. We're going to use more land and water today so that the 8 billion people with the 10 billion or 2 more billion coming to dinner in the next 50 years, maybe 1.5 billion based on what Frank said earlier, in the next 4 years, or I guess it was Sarah, with those folks, that we have enough food. Why is it important to have enough food? Why is that the most important thing for people? Goes back to my conversation with Dr. Borlaug in 1984. We as a species will do whatever we have to do as people, as individuals, to feed our children. We do not watch our children starve to death passively. We don't. We do crazy, stupid things if we have to feed our children. And in that context, it ain't stupid. That's a biological imperative. I'll kill the last mountain gorilla to feed my starving children, and so will anyone else. That's one of the challenges we have. So feeding people is the first step to any sustainability. We will not sustain other life on this planet with hungry people. If it moves in Africa, it's meat, because people are a protein deficit. That's an important consideration and challenge we face. So as we move into how we stop doing stupid and don't start doing stupid, life cycle assessment gives us a mechanism for doing that. Life cycle thinking, the good news is this is all public domain. You don't have to go out and buy a book. You can get the books online, and they're amazingly easy to access and actually pretty simple to understand. The complexity comes into the details. So I'd recommend this guide first and foremost. And if you've got my contact information, email me and I'll give you all the links to all these things. I actually teach a graduate course in life cycle assessment. So I have all this in one handout. I can email you. How is LCA used? Two really big approaches: attributional, and you saw some of those attributional results today, and consequential, the so what part. Attributional, what is it? Consequential, so what? Current historic perspectives. What's the greenhouse gas encumbered in chicken breast? Minor changes in production compared to product systems. It requires allocation. Allocation's tricky. You got to have rules. You got to follow the rules in allocation. Just like in accounting, if you don't, well, that gives you Enron. So rules do matter in all accounting systems. Consequential, forward-looking assessment. What's going to happen if and when? Evaluate the potential environmental consequences of decision, doing stupid or not. Requires an economic understanding too, because it's all about us, and we make decisions based predominantly on economics at the highest level and ultimately about social values. Now let's talk about reference flows. This is one of the critical concepts in LCA. You saw several of these. It's a quantified amount of product, parts, components that are necessary for the product to deliver the performance described by the functional unit. Now this is where we get interactive. Many of you are much younger than me. My first grandchild will be born in about 3 to 5 weeks, depending on how things go with my kiddo. She's doing great. So I'll have my first grandson hits the ground. So I'm fairly attuned to this. Many of you have experience with this. What's the functional unit of a diaper, cloth versus disposable? For the sake of the video, you don't have to go to the microphone. Shout it out. What's the functional unit of a diaper? If I'm doing a life cycle assessment and you want to know as a new parent, should I get cloth diapers or should I get disposable diapers? What's the functional unit? You're animal scientists. You should be able to do this. Uses per output. Uses per output. That is kilograms of poo captured per unit. Is that what you're saying?
No. How many times can you use the unit?
Oh, how many times can you use the unit?
Kilograms and times unit. So lifetime of the unit.
Lifetime of the unit and kilograms of it. So we have that. That's reasonable. Any counterpoints? Lifetime of the baby. Of the uses. Well, you're getting closer. Really, the best functional unit is time to potty training when that's no longer necessary. Time to potty training. Because how many of you have ever used cloth diapers?
I'm ahead of you on grandkids, by the way.
Oh, yes, I know. You're ahead of me on grandkids. I'm hoping to catch up, but my younger two are not. So anyway, so yes, so the best functional unit is the diaper as a concept. If you're choosing whether you use cloth diapers or disposable, that's a categorical choice. And so your functional unit isn't the individual product, it's the category of product. So you see how that distinction is important. Now that's an example to remember anytime you do a life cycle assessment. If you get the functional unit wrong, nothing else is going to be right. Nothing else is going to be right. So, and by the way, when you do the analysis, you'll find that cloth diapered babies potty train a lot faster than disposable diapers, because disposable diapers are pretty darn comfy. You don't get gooey. So, and those reference flows are part of that definition. They translate the abstract functional unit into specific product flows, cotton versus polyester or fiber fill for each of the compared systems. So the product alternatives are compared on an equivalent basis, So you know roughly X number of years, Y number of diapers to potty training. So now you can compare how many times you have to wash the cloth diapers over that child's potty training experience versus how many disposable diapers go in a landfill over that child's potty training experiences. Now you have comparable elements to make a decision what you're supposed to do, to stop doing stupid or to not start doing stupid. I'm sorry, disposable for me. I tried cloth. I lasted 6 days. All right. Reference flows are the starting point for building necessary models of the product system. And the reference flows are made up of unit processes. Unit processes are the things, there we go, that you quantify, have inputs and outputs from other processes, inputs and outputs from nature. That's a unit process. The unit processes combine to make reference flows. And we've got reference flows that have 10 to 12,000 unit processes in them. It gets really complex really fast. Here's an example. This is from the IPCC report. We talked a lot about nitrogen, and we should, because nitrogen is more important than carbon from a greenhouse gas perspective from agriculture. It is the thing. So if we talk about these things, if we look at nitrogen moving through the biosphere, ag LCAs are complicated because they touch on everything. They touch on everything throughout the system. Almost every part of the biosphere and technology. Nitrogen is one of those, and it's complicated because this is 80% of it. Right here, I'm waving my arms through nitrogen. So what we do to address these things, we use crop models in order to understand and build unit processes from the land, from crop production, animal models, and Al's IFSM is one of the most important ones we use for beef, for unit taking crop model input for making unit processes that go into then to life cycle assessment to evaluate impacts. Very simple, right? Well, no, that's where the fun is. So let's just take a look at corn real quick. Corn, there's the boundaries of corn. We have inputs, we have background systems, everything that goes into it, and foreground systems. it really looks like this, and this is in your in the brochure today too. This graphic's the one I included because I think it's the most important. You look at the data inputs, or the data sources we have, our inputs. We use Apex for crop modeling. This is for corn. Then the outputs, and all of this is necessary to create a set of outputs from life cycle assessment, from modeling to outputs. This is just for corn. This is not for beef. And so the question then is, well, what scale is this? This is essentially a unit of calculation of computation is a field. This is for, because that's a unit of homogeneous management typically. So we have to do this for every field in the nation. There are 325,000 roughly corn growers in any given year, depending on soybean and corn prices. How are we going to come up with these answers? Well, what we have to do is then we have to use archetypes across the landscape. We happen to use ecoregions as our archetype aggregation level. Why do we use ecoregions? Because they're areas of similar weather, similar soils, and so we have similar practices and similar impacts. So we use ecoregions for these archetypes, and we have to calibrate everything because the validity. George Box, Wisconsin statistician, famously said, "All models are wrong. Some models are useful. Let's make the model useful by demonstrating calibration." And then we can start asking, well, where's all that nitrogen going anyway? Which ecoregions are the most prone to it? So now we can get to this point of our discourse. We also are looking at simple questions like, what happens if we don't have, if we use cover crops, if we don't use disease control, if we don't use insect control, no weed control, what happens to greenhouse gas or other impacts? So we're just finishing this work for Crop Life America. I'm presenting at their meeting back here next week. And you can see that, well, go figure, when yield goes down, impacts go up. That's why when dead animals show up in your production system, all of your impacts go up. Animal mortality is a major impact. Yield loss is a major impact. It gets even more complicated when you add an animal to this process, because if you see the animal right there in the middle, all that feed, everything I talked about just gets to the animal. Now we have everything after the animal, and the animal is a complex system. We talked about that today. So we did this analysis of Inogen, which is a Syngenta corn product that actually happens to have alpha amylase and heat stable alpha amylase enhanced in it, so it digests faster, converts the starch to sugar faster. They developed this for the brewing industry, but when the brewing industry didn't buy anymore, they sent it off to the feedlots, and by golly, they discovered cows did pretty good with it. So in fact, we showed using life cycle assessment that we can reduce climate change, land use, water use, and fossil fuel impacts. And we had limited data, always limited data, but we were using University of Nebraska and Kansas State feed trials. And we demonstrated significant, if you think 5% is not significant, that's per 1,000 kilograms of live weight, reducing 5% greenhouse gas emissions. Multiply that times how many kilograms of live weight of beef we produce a year, starts to add up. Now that meat processing part I just talked about, that I skipped over, right? One little box. This is an example of a fairly simple unit process flow diagram for a meat processing facility. These things expand out very quickly, and become very complex. The complexity is the beauty of the thing. This is ultimately where we're going. We want midpoint categories that matter. Sometimes people want endpoint categories like human health, ecosystem quality, climate change, and resources, or a single score. If anyone's trying to sell you a single score, walk away fast, because single scores are complete judgment calls. They're somebody's opinion. They have no scientific validity. How do you index human health and ecosystem quality? You can't. So what you have, but you can aggregate and for those endpoints. We also have standardization. FAO LEAP and other standards are emerging. It's really amazing what we've seen in the last 10 years. When Greg and I started doing this, Greg Tolman and I started doing this work 18 years ago, we had to figure out, make stuff up, and we made stuff up wrong. We did stupid a lot, but we working with a large community of practitioners, we've gotten it better. Thank you.
Okay. We have time for a question or two for Dr. Matlock. Anybody have a burning question they'd like to ask before we have our last speaker? Okay, please use the microphone.
You can queue up Melissa while I'm doing this.
So I wonder, can you elaborate more on those calculations for aggregating the endpoint? So I think you showed the recipe, and I've seen that many times, and I wonder how do we get to that? But I
Rest-
wonder that it makes sense to try to establish something that we can aggregate, no?
The only way you can effectively and coherently aggregate indicators is if you can find a common unit of a unit of them. And so what human health, for example, in recipe uses is disability affected life years, which disability affected impact of life years, dailies. And so then you can start adding up your dailies, and then that's the way you get a human health. So that's basically what it does. Biodiversity is typically habitat impact, which is typically land use areas. So those are the sorts of, you got to find a common unit in order to add things up. Otherwise, you just got a bushel basket of mixed fruit, and that's great for a salad, but it doesn't make a good indicator.